You're listening to the TOEFL podcast number 16. Hello and welcome back to the TOEFL podcast, episode 16. I'm your host, Dr. Jeff McQuillan from the Center for Educational Development, located in beautiful Los Angeles, California. On today's TOEFL podcast, we're going to do something a little different. Normally, we have a listening comprehension activity where you listen and then I do explanations. But I have received some emails from some of you who are listening who want me to talk about some other parts of the TOEFL test of English as a foreign language and other English tests that require that you do some writing. Well, we don't normally talk about that here on the podcast. I think it is easier to read about that than to listen about it, but I will talk a little bit today about how to write a good essay in English for a test like the TOEFL or IELTS or similar tests that you may take in your own country. I'm going to give you some advice, some tips, TIPS, some tips, some small pieces of advice that I hope will help you. The first and most important piece of advice I can tell you about writing English exams is that you need to improve your writing. You need to do lots and lots of reading. Now, I know some of you may say, well, I need to learn how to write, and so I have to write more. Well, yes, that might help sometimes, but the most important thing, according to the research on learning how to write over the past 30, 40 years, the most important thing that we have found is that reading, people who do a lot of reading become better writers. In fact, there was a study done about 10 years ago, more actually, about 12 years ago, where they asked a bunch of international students here in the United States who had taken the TOEFL examination. They asked them how much they read, how many books. They asked them how long they had studied English. They asked them how long they had, or how much grammar instruction they had. And they asked them their TOEFL score. And they did a statistical analysis, where they look at all of these answers and see what pattern there is. And the pattern they discovered is that the more that you read, the higher your TOEFL score was. You had a better vocabulary. Your writing was better. You had better grammar. In fact, it didn't really matter how long people said they studied English. It was people who did the most reading in English that helped the most, or that had the highest scores, I should say. Well, what kind of things should you read to prepare for the TOEFL examination? Well, almost anything you read, especially nonfiction, that is, things that are true about something that is not made up, will help, although reading fiction will also help build your vocabulary and your grammar. I would especially recommend reading lots and lots of essays. Essays like the kind of essay you have to write. If you want to learn the format and the way that a good essay should be built, should be constructed, should be put together, then you should read lots of essays. Now, fortunately, on the internet, you can see lots of free TOEFL sample essays, good essays, that you can read. I would, if I were going to take the TOEFL exam, I would Google, right? Put in a search engine. I would search for sample TOEFL essays, and I would read as many of those as I could. And I'm going to read them in part so I can understand what a good essay looks like, what the sentences look like, what the paragraphs look like. What should I put first? What should I put second? All of that you can get by reading lots of essays. So that would be my first recommendation. Read lots of sample essays and, of course, read a lot generally in English. Now, you should understand, it's important for you to understand that writing in English, especially writing for school, what we would call academic writing, writing for the university, for school, academic writing in English can seem to some people very boring, very dull, not very creative. And there is some truth to that. When we are writing an essay for school or an essay for the TOEFL exam, the most important thing is not creativity. That's not what your professor necessarily wants to see. They want to see a very simple, or at least a very clear argument. They want to see it follow a certain pattern. And that pattern is not difficult to learn. And it is probably similar in your own language. But English especially is not interested, the TOEFL exam, other exams, and professors in general are not interested in creative language. They're interested in clear language. Well, any good essay, as you know, and any good piece of writing, whether it's an essay or report or whatever, the most important thing is to remember that you have to have at least 3 important parts. You have an introduction, you have what's called the body of the essay, that's the main part of the essay, and then you have the conclusion. Now let's start with the introduction. What should you put in the introduction of your essay? Well, there's a couple of things you want to do. Let's say that the topic of the TOEFL question was about the internet. Is the internet good for students or bad for students? And TOEFL questions will often ask you to give your opinion about something. But when they ask you to give an opinion, what your idea of it is, you have to give support. You have to give evidence. Well, in the introduction, the first thing you want to do is to let the reader, the person reading, know what your essay is about. They, of course, know what the question was, but even though they know the question, you still need to restate or say again. To restate, R-E-S-T-A-T-E, means to say again in your essay what you are talking about. I usually recommend the first sentence to be something somewhat general about the general topic. So, for example, if the question was, is the internet good or bad for students today? You might start off by saying, the internet is one of the most important technological advances in the last 20 years. But many people believe the internet is not all good, that there are some problems with the internet. In this essay, I will argue that the internet has been mostly a positive thing for students around the world. I will talk about 2 reasons why this is true. Well, that's an introduction paragraph. Let's talk a little bit about it. First, I started with a very general statement about the topic. And I then said, well, some people think this and some people think that. But my opinion is that the internet is good for students. That is restating or stating your opinion. So you tell them what the topic is, and then you tell them your opinion. In addition to telling them what you are going to write about, you also want to give some information about how you are going to talk about it. And that the best way to do that is, I think, to give a number. Now, you don't have to give a number, but I would say tell them how many main ideas you are going to talk about. 2 ideas, 3 ideas, that's about all you want to do. You don't want to do more than 2 or 3 main ideas for a TOEFL examination or for most writing examinations. You don't have time. Usually for TOEFL, you have, I think, about 30 minutes. So you need to spend the first 2 to 4 minutes thinking about what you are going to say. And I would actually write down the main ideas and, make some notes about what you are going to write about. Because you won't have time to go back and do a lot of changing, a lot of revisions where you change the text to make it better. I always use the number 2 or 3, and even if I can't think of something when I start writing, by the time I am finished with my first point, my first main idea, I usually think of a second one. So I usually start by saying I'm going to talk about 3 reasons why the internet is good for students, or 2 reasons. Then that's your introduction. That should be short. For the TOEFL, probably 3 to 5 sentences. Then you want to move on to the body of the essay, the main part of the essay. Remember I said that you want 2 or 3 main ideas. Each one of those ideas should be in a paragraph, its own paragraph, a separate paragraph. So your first idea, let's say your first idea for this sample essay is that the internet provides instant access. Instant, meaning right away, instant access. So you're going to start that second paragraph of your essay. Remember, your introduction is the first paragraph. The second paragraph of your essay may be something, or should be, I think, something very simple, very direct. The sentence should be, the first reason why the internet is good for students is because it gives them immediate or instant access to information. Notice that I use the number again first. And for the in the next paragraph, I'll say second. So you don't have to do that, but it makes it easier for the person who is reading and the person who is grading your essay to know where you are going. And that's very, very important. Because if your essay is well organized, even if your grammar isn't perfect, you will get a higher score than if your essay has pretty good grammar, good vocabulary, but is not organized. So organization is extremely important. Well, we are already close to the end of our time here, and we are only on the first part of the essay. So we're going to make this a two-part program. And next week, we'll come back and talk about other ways of writing the essay or how you should finish your essay. I would appreciate some email from you to tell me whether you like me talking about other parts of the TOEFL or other parts of English exams like writing and reading and grammar and so forth. I probably won't talk very much about grammar because there are many sources of information about grammar. But if you want me to continue talking about things, in addition to the listening, and of course we will continue doing sample listening, email me and let me know. Otherwise, I won't continue talking about this and will only talk about the listening section. You can email me at TOEFLPod, TOEFLPod, at TOEFLPod16. I'd like to thank, as always, Dr. Lucy Say, who helps write and produce this podcast. Although you only hear my voice, this podcast is made possible by Lucy's work. Remember to visit our website at TOEFLPod.com for more information about this podcast and our other podcasts, such as our daily English as a Second Language podcast. From Los Angeles, California, I'm Jeff McQuillan. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time on the TOEFL Podcast. The TOEFL Podcast is written and produced by Dr. Lucy Say. Your host is Dr. Jeff McQuillan. This podcast is copyright 2006 by the Center for Educational Development. TOEFL is a registered trademark of the Educational Testing Service, which does not endorse and was not involved in the production of this podcast.